Welcome to the apex of sports ownership, the Apex Athletic Collective.
Welcome in everyone to episode 49 of Instigate Success, Building an ABA Franchise. I am your host, Jake Schoen, aka Jakey Muffins, here again every Friday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, about an hour or so for each podcast. Thank you again for joining us, and thank you everyone here who is on the Patreon. You can always join the Apex Athletic Patreon to get exclusive news throughout the off season on the Hoosier State Instigators, and we'll continue to have votes throughout the off season as well. A lot of news for this week's episode. Continue to play in the IBL Gold Cup, so we got a couple games to recap a little bit from that. We also, if you haven't been watching on Monday nights, we have amateur night now. So myself and Frosty, we go and we watch the past weekend's games from the IBL Gold Cup, provide our commentary, a little bit of feedback as well, and we have some pretty cool kind of like Mystery Science Theater 3000 figures at the bottom throughout that as well. But that's a lot of fun. So Monday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, if you're free, you can watch those games live with us as we rewatch them. And then we also put that up on YouTube as well. So if you don't have a chance to watch it live, you can watch it on the YouTube as well afterwards. Anyways, let's get started on this week's episode for Instigate Success. So, this past weekend, June 15th, we had two games again. Reminder, every weekend throughout June, we have two games every Saturday for the IBL Gold Cup, and that'll be like the regular season with the Gold Cup. Then we are locked in to the Super Cup, being the only professional team. Again, the other teams we're playing are amateur teams, and it's a pro-am league, so they could still have a couple of professionals on the team, but there's a limit on that. We're the only team that's technically a professional team within the tournament. So we are locked into that championship game, and then we'll be playing the top team from the pro-am side. So that is what we're looking at in July will be the Super Cup. But throughout all of June, we have these regular season games. First game for this past weekend was against the Freebirds. That was at 9 a.m. on Saturday morning, which is the earliest the game can start for the IBL Gold Cup. And all those games, they run 9 a.m. until I think 4 p.m. is their last tip off. And all games are free admission at the Crossroads Community Church. Again, if you're out in that area, we highly recommend you go and see those games in person. We have had many times been able to play in the Crossroads Community Church facility, and it's a wonderful facility. They've got it set up so they got two courts running simultaneously for the Gold Cup, but we've played there for our exhibition game last year, as well as a playoff game, a play-in game against the Indiana Legends, and we've had our tryouts there a couple of times as well. So definitely a venue we've become familiar with, almost like a second home venue, but it's not technically our home venue. There's actually a team that will have that as the home venue that is joining the ABA. It is the Indiana Shuckers. Again, that was the exhibition game that we played against the IBL team last year before we hit the first game of the ABA season. But the Shuckers will be joining the ABA as an exhibition team in this upcoming ABA season. That will be their home venue. Anyways, this game was one for the record books. So, this was an interesting game. I mean, if you see the box score, it's going to be pretty indicative of what took place on the court. But before we show that, just want to give a shout out to one new player that was at the games this weekend, Lance Hopkins. He's also If you remember, we had those new signings from last week. He was our one of our new signings from last week, a new instigator who has not been on the team before, but impressed us during the tryouts. And when I say us, I talk about the ownership group. I was not there myself, and I didn't see the tape because we had some technical difficulties. So I'm going off of the word of the people from the on the site, and we got to see Lance for the first time play, get some footage on him. So that was another welcoming moment to the Hoosier State Instigators, and we saw some pretty good moves from him. So he started off the game with, I believe, a three. Either that, or I'm just remembering the highlights. We do put up the highlights as well for each of these games every week on our YouTube channel as well. But I do remember he hit some threes. He had some nice defense as well. And this was a kind of reminiscent of the weekend before when Jackson Stone made his debut for the Instigators, and really made their presence known early on in these games. And it's always something we love to see, both as an owner and a fan of the Instigators, to see these new guys join the team and kind of just jump right in and establish themselves as somebody that is capable of being a part of the Instigators. So that was nice to see. Again, another new player for the Instigators. He is officially signed for the ABA as well. So he is going to be playing for us in both these IBL games. And once we hit the ABA season, Lance will be on the team for that as well. I believe the signings we had announced last week, not this week, but last week, were two returning players, team captain Chuck Bloom, and first ever Hoosier State instigator Joe Bird. And then we had the two new signees, which was Lance as well as Kevin Cameron, aka Stunna Boy. So that was the four that we had announced the last week, as far as players joining the Instigators for the ABA season upcoming. Later in this show, we have a couple new signings as well. So a little bit of a tease right there. But for the box score, so I've mentioned this. That is a picture from the game. So that was a picture they sent from that game. Final score you see there, 118 to 30. Yeah. So that is the largest victory in Instigators history. We were the home team in that, so we were 118, and the Freebirds were 30. Uh, so 88-point game, and obviously the record for highest margin of victory, and things pretty much went our way throughout that whole entire game. Uh, as much as that score differences, the Freebirds are still a competitive team, and great spirits throughout that game as well. Definitely, appreciate them playing that game, and playing with the intensity they had throughout the whole entire game, and not really throwing in the towel, or having a bad attitude about the thing, and they took it positively, which was nice to see. But yeah, pretty much everything seemed to go in the way of the Instigators in that game. Obviously, that's what leads to a final score as such. But the guys that we've had, a little bit of a roster was a little different from the past couple of weeks. So we got Chuck Bloom back. He had the absence the weekend before, but he was back this weekend. And then, as I mentioned, Lance also joined. AB was still out for this week due to that back injury, but we are hoping for him to come back soon, possibly even tomorrow, this weekend coming up. So that's another thing to keep an eye on. But as far as the roster, for the past weekend in the games for the 15th Returning players, we had Joe Bird, Chuck Bloom, JoJo Hart, and Mike Pugh. Again, we've seen those guys on the court throughout this IBL season. Then returning for the guys that were new to the team, Kevin Cameron and Rico, as well as Jackson Stone and T. And then we also had Lance for the first time. So we actually had a pretty decent sized roster this weekend. And it helped allow for more substitutions, more playing time for some of those new guys. And one guy we also want to shout out that I think we really saw kind of like a step, uh, in a good direction is Kevin Cameron. He really stepped up. I feel like, and we mentioned this on the broadcast Monday night on the amateur night, both myself and Corey, that it seemed like Kevin he really stepped up and wasn't kind of trying to force some shots that we saw in the first couple of games. He was looking for the open man, and he had a couple of nice assists throughout that game. But as always, he has the high motor, and even late in these games when stamina and fatigue kind of take over, um, he just is always going after the ball, always trying to make a play. But yeah, we saw him make some nice passes this week, not trying to force up some shots. So definitely glad with that. Um, and from the guys that we've seen in the past, the guys from last year did their thing as normal. Chuck, JoJo, Joe, and Mike as well. They always we can count on them. We know what we expect from them, and they definitely don't disappoint throughout this IBL season so far. And the new guys, Jackson again playing down low and hitting some mid-range shots as well. So nice, continuing a nice performance from the past weekend. Rico, always making his presence known. T making some nice defensive plays. And then, as I had said earlier, Lance making a nice debut. But yeah, pretty much everything seemed to go right for the Instigators in that game. That's going to be a hard record for us to break as far as point differential. I can't imagine there's going to be too many games in that range of the 88 point margin of victory. The second game we had for the past weekend was a little bit later, so we had a little bit of break. Noon, so there's 2 hours difference between the end of that first game into the second game, and we got the final score here. You can see that also was in favor of the Instigators, and that one was a little bit closer, still a pretty hefty margin of victory, 36-point victory, I believe. Yeah, 36 it should be. So still pretty big margin of victory. But if you watch that game, the first half was actually pretty close. I think it was still within single digits at half. And then the second half, the Instigators really pulled out in front. Um, but good performances all around again by the Instigators in that second game. We've been able to break 100 points now in 4 straight games, and we've also got 4 straight wins and in those 4 games. So definitely going down the right path for the Instigators after the first week of games, which didn't happen to go our way. We've seem to figure things out a little bit better in the second and third week of IBL Gold Cup play. And the Freebirds, which we had played, they had not won a game at that point, and then this past weekend they hadn't won a game either. So that was, little. We expected to win that game by a bigger margin. Have You Heard was actually an undefeated team, if I'm not mistaken, going into that game against the Instigators. So that was a big matchup as far as standings go within the Gold Cup rankings. And the Instigators showed out, and being a professional team, they held their own against the team that was undefeated in Gold Cup play. And they actually, have you heard? I just looked. They won their other game from this past weekend. So the only loss on Have You Heard's record is this game here against the Hoosier State Instigators. So definitely a solid roster um, of players. And again, we saw every time we play these games in the Gold Cup, and anytime we match up against IBL teams, there's great 3-point shooting from all of these teams. And that's always the one thing that we always got to keep an eye on. The one thing I will point out that I thought was pretty cool to see from the Instigators this past week of games was the different types of defenses. So normally we've seen throughout basically the history of the Instigators, man-to-man type of defense. That's pretty typical in most professional and even collegiate level, maybe even if you extend it to amateur. I'd say the most common type of defenses within basketball are a man-to-man style, where each player matches up against another player, and then they keep track of a player. Sometimes you'll switch depending on screens and such, but pretty much you'll stay on one player, and that's your guy on defense. You got to follow him and keep track of him the whole entire time. That's the most typical style of defense. But we also threw in a zone defense, like a 2-3 zone, which, being a Syracuse fan and a Syracuse grad, I grew up watching the zone defense, and that's something I'm very familiar with. So that was cool to see. The zone defense compared to a man-to-man defense, is where you have, so the 2-3 zone would be two players up at the top of the key, so up around like that free throw line, and above that, and they guard whoever is up around the 3-point line at that area, and then they can crash in towards the free throw line. Then the three, you've got your guy down low in the center at the back court, or on the baseline like of the court, and then you've got your two guys out towards the 3-point line at the baseline of the court. So the zone defense was, it was pretty successful from both of these two games from the past weekend. So it was nice to see that we're able to implement multiple defenses, and I think that's something that can be very beneficial going into the ABA season, because sometimes the matchups, if you can switch these defensive schemes and go from man to man and zone, it'll confuse offenses because there's different ways that you have to maneuver around each. Obviously, if you're going with man to man, you look for the mismatches. That can be height, that can be speed. If you have guys that set screens really well, there's also ways to set up like that. The 2-3 zone's a little bit different though, because if you have guys who rotate around the court, you're not going to have the same people tracking them the whole time. So you've got to find holes within the zones. So when the zones collapse, normally you'll have a spot of the zone that opens up, and you have to find those zones before they collapse back in. And that's beneficial to be able to run back and forth between the two, whenever that is necessary. And then also a lot of trapping that we saw. So pressing in the backcourt, trying to push for the ball on the defense, and try to make the opposition make mistakes on the offensive end. So that's something I really took away from this past weekend's games, was the defensive effort. Obviously, a 30-point game and then a 77-point game. 77 a little bit on the higher end, but 30 points is pretty crazy in a professional game to allow that, or even a semi-pro, amateur, pro-am type style. Um, and collegiate rules. 30 is very, very impressive. 77, not quite as good, but still, that defensive effort throughout the game was very impressive. So that's my big takeaway, I'd say, from this past weekend, was the defensive efforts. Lots of steals as well. With the defenses kind of throwing the other teams off. And the other thing was, we had a huge slam dunk alley oop this weekend, and I think it was probably the first time we have ever seen this player put down a dunk in game. So that was pretty crazy. I've seen him do it a couple of times, not alley oop, but a dunk in pregame warmups for some of the games that I've been out to. But this was the first time in game, so we actually had the two players involved with the alley oop were Jackson Stone and Joe Bird. So naturally, you would think it's the taller guy, which is Jackson, who is 6'10", but no, it's actually Joe Bird. Joe Bird was the one that slammed this ball down. Jackson threw it up for the alley oop, and believe his claim was that was the first time he's actually been on the passing side of an alley oop, but he threw one up. And Joe Bird slammed it down for our highlight reel of the year so far for the IBL Gold Cup, at least in our play. Was a nice alley oop from Jackson Stone to Joe Bird. So if you haven't seen that, that's on our socials, as well as we've got a short on YouTube. It's also part of our highlight reel on YouTube. So definitely go look and watch that. That's a very impressive slam dunk. And I think that's going to sum up this past weekend's games. We'll take a look at the standings for the IBL Gold Cup as of right now. Obviously, we've got games tomorrow, so it's going to change again tomorrow. But take a look here on so they have three divisions. There's the East. We'll start with BBB, who was the one of the first teams we matched up against. They only have one loss on the season so far, and they actually got the better end against against us in that first matchup that we had for any of the games, or the second matchup we had in any of the games, but in the first week of games for the IBL Gold Cup. But yeah, BBB has been an impressive team. And the only team they lost to was the Woodpeckers, which we'll see them in the other division. But the Woodpeckers were, the other team we played the first week, who also defeated us. So those are the two teams that defeated us, BBB and the Woodpeckers. But BBB currently at the top of the East Division, and they're tied with Orleans and the Wet Bandits as well, with that 5-1 record. Um, we'll see. We play one of those other teams this weekend, so we'll take a look at that game as well. Basketball team, we played against them not this past week, but the week before, in our second week of Gold Cup play. So 4-2 for them. That's where one of their losses comes from. And the Tropics sitting at the bottom of the division, currently 0-6. But it definitely seems like that's a pretty solid division. Only one team so far that has a losing record, and the top four teams are within a game of each other. So that is impressive within its own division there. And we've matched up against two of the teams in that division, both BBB and the basketball team. Again, we got the better end of the basketball team, while BBB got the better end of us. The Western Division, still two undefeated teams in that division. I believe they're the only two remaining undefeated teams left in the Gold Cup. The Woodpeckers, as we mentioned, they were the first team we matched up against, and they obviously won against us. The other team that's still undefeated is the Limestone Legends. So definitely looking like the two top teams as of right now within the IBL Gold Cup. You also have you heard, a very, very solid team. We just talked about them. That was the team that we played against this past weekend. And you see there they have one loss. So their only loss is from the game this past weekend against us. So that is a very solid team. They're only one game out when it comes to the top of the rankings. And they would be tied with any of the teams in the Eastern division when it comes to their record. The other two teams within the West Division is the Blue Demons, who we matched up against the past weekend as well, which was week the IBL Gold Cup play, and Blue Thunder at 2-4. So the Blue Demons at the 500 mark right now, looking to continue to improve and get themselves into a winning record hopefully this week. And Blue Thunder trying to right the ship as well, at 2-4 currently. But the West Division, again, the only division with any team that's undefeated still, and they have two teams undefeated. So they have the two teams with the highest record, and then another team with only one loss. Again, the loss was against us this past week. And then we have the Central Division. Central Division is still looking for their first win. I mentioned last week it was possible that this scenario could happen. That all those teams, because they did not match up against each other yet, could still wind up having no wins. So that reminds me, I got to look at this week's games to see if any of them match up against each other, because that would be pretty impressive if they continue to keep this up without having a win going into the fourth week of games. So we've got, let's see, the Lions, Freebirds, the Freebirds, the Rim Ticklers, and the Showtime Lakers. So the Lakers do not match up against any teams in their division. It looks like they have the Blue Demons and BBB. Then we have the Lions, and the Lions play against the Woodpeckers and Blue Thunder. So again, no teams in that division. The Freebirds against the Legends and the Tropics. So again, there's a chance, but the Tropics, they don't have a win either. So that will be one team will have their first win in that matchup. So that is going to be an important game for those two teams right there. And the last one, the Rim Ticklers, they play the Wet Bandits, and they also match up against us this weekend. So yes, there is a possibility that we could remain without a win in the Central Division after 4 weeks of play. So that will be a interesting thing. Definitely something I'll continue to keep an eye out for. But it's interesting that it's lined up that way, that the Central Division still has not won a game, and then we also have the West Division, which has two undefeated teams. Um, but yeah, so it's still a possibility to continue not to have any wins within that Central Division for at least this week. And once that happens, then there's only one more week of gameplay. So last week, though, it does look like they match up against each other. So it'll be interesting, because there's a chance we could go into the last week of the Gold Cup play where the Central Division has no wins, and these are head-to-head games within the division in the last week, and pretty much they would decide who is the best team in that Central. So that is pretty interesting. As far as this week's games, though, for the Hoosier State Instigators, our first game is against the Rim Ticklers. As we just mentioned there, the Rim Ticklers still looking for their first win. But that game will be at 10 a.m. Tomorrow. And again, free admission for all of these IBL Gold Cup games. If you're in the area, highly recommend um, going out to those games, and joining in a full day's worth of free basketball. Again, tip off starts at 9, and the last game tips off at 4. So you got a whole day worth of free basketball you can watch at the Crossroads Community Church out in Bedford, Indiana. And I'll just say these graphics are pretty fun to make because there's a lot of creative freedom that goes with this because most of these teams, again, they don't have like official logos. And if they do, I'm not very familiar with where they post the logos. Um, so a lot of these, being amateur or pro am teams, they don't really have like, I guess, professional styled logos. So we make up these graphics for them, which it's fun to do. And then we've also seen like the jersey situation as well. So it was the first game we tried to be good and wear all the jerseys. We were supposed to wear the black jerseys for all the games, and it's pretty much just turned into like wear a black shirt and hopefully it's got a number on it. We've seen outfit changes throughout these games, and some teams wearing the same color, some teams just wearing whatever. It's also fun to watch when stuff like that happens. But creative freedom on my end when it comes to these graphics. But that was a fun one. As well as the basketball team, that one was also pretty fun to make. But again, that is the Rim Ticklers looking for their first win, a first chance at a win here against the Hoosier State Instigators. As always, we're gonna have a bigger target on our back, being the professional team within the within this Gold Cup though. So that'll be a fun game to start off the Instigators Saturday, tomorrow at 10 a.m. And the second game will be against Orleans. And possibly breaking news, looks like the schedule may have changed from the text that I'm receiving right now. So keep an eye out if you're in there. If you're there in person, it looks like it may be changed to back-to-back games. But that is breaking news. So that is being figured out behind the scenes at this point. So the time may change from that 1 o'clock to a little bit earlier. Regardless, though, it looks like we are facing against Orleans tomorrow. Orleans, if we go back to the graphics for the records, Orleans is 5-1. So that's also a very impressive team that we'll be matching up against there in the second game. And let me see if I can pull the one team that Orleans wound up losing to. It looks like the team that Orleans lost to is actually the Blue Demons. So that's a little interesting because we faced the Blue Demons and we were able to win that game by 30, so pretty decidedly. But the Blue Demons are only 500 on the season, so that just may have been a little bit of an off game, if I had to guess, for Orleans. But they've been pretty impressive, aside from that one hiccup there against the Blue Demons. So definitely a strong team to match up against. Um, and again, this is kind of how our games matched up last week, where we had that first game was against the team still looking for their first win, and the second game going against one of the top teams within the IBL Gold Cup, as far as the Pro Am teams. So that will be an interesting matchup there. Um, So definitely, if you're in the area, watch those games in person. If not, Monday night is going to be real fun, real interesting on amateur night, 9 p.m. Eastern time. Again, myself and Frosty host that, but we'll be watching those games then. Um, but I'm not sure if we'll have another 88-point victory, but you'll have to watch on Monday night to find that out. But that is the preview and the recap for the IBL Gold Cup, with the Instigators. Just one more week though. After this week's games, just one more week of games in the Gold Cup before they hit the playoffs, and they do a little bracket for them, and then they face off against us in the Super Cup in July, I believe the second or third weekend. in July. So really not too much time left after this week's games for the IBL Gold Cup. We also had some more breaking news this past week. If you followed us on social, you probably have already seen this, but we always want to make the announcement here as well. We had more signings for the Instigators. Again, this is for the ABA season, these signings, when we post these official announcement signings. Um, we had taken into consideration that player evaluation that was filled out earlier, month or so ago, maybe 2 months ago at this point, by our fan voters. If you're not already a fan voter, you can become a fan voter on Patreon. Let me see. Let's get that thing scrolling. Yeah, so become a fan voter today. Um, the player evaluations are not there anymore, but this is what I was talking about. So we took those player evaluations into account when it came to this. And you can also get, insider access, up to date news, a little bit more info than the general public when it comes to the Instigators by joining the Patreon there at uh, www.patreon.com/Apex Athletic Collective. But again, those fan voters, we took those considerations into the players that we want back on the roster for this season. And obviously, we extend offers to the players, but it's up to the players to accept or decline these or negotiate. And we always want to see them to progress to higher levels as well. But we had a couple of big announcements as far as signings this week. So in addition to those four players that we already had announced, again, Joe Bird, the first instigator ever, is returning. Team captain from season one, Chuck Bloom. Two new signees, Kevin Stunnaboy Cameron, as well as Lance Hopkins. And JoJo Hart, he will be returning as a Hoosier State instigator. Definitely love to hear that. Um, one of the guys that we loved having on the team. He was also able to hit that 24-second challenge when we had that big promotion with the giveaway. Um, awesome dude to have coming back for the instigators in our second season of ABA play. And we saw him, have some great play from the guard position in our first season as a Hoosier State instigator. And very deceptive for the size, but he's a pretty solid rebounder as well. That we found that out in season one, and good defensively with the steals as well. But he also, I mean, I mentioned that 24-second challenge, able to get hot and hit some shots. So definitely welcome back, JoJo Hart, and congratulations on being an instigator for season 2 as well. So now we've got 3 returning players officially announced for the second season of the Hoosier State Instigators ABA. We also had another big announcement with the signings. Lawan Whitney is coming back. Swish, he is coming back for season 2. The leading scorer, leading 3-point shooter for the Hoosier State Instigators is coming back for season 2. So 2 great guards will be coming back for season 2 with the Instigators. And that really helps solidify that roster that we've already established to this point. But again, Lawan, I think he shot about 50% from three in season one. So obviously, deadly from beyond the line, 3-point line. And that puts us, so we've got a pretty solid front court at this point. So with that, the 2 new signings, JoJo and Lawan, coming back for season 2. Already announced was Joe Bird and Chuck Bloom. And then we had the 2 new signees as well, Kevin Cameron and Lance Hopkins. That's 6 players already that we've officially announced for that ABA roster. And keep in mind, I think there's only allowed to be 13 spots, if I'm not mistaken. I think there's 13 spots open for the roster. So that's basically half of the roster has already been officially announced for the Instigator. We had mentioned this in the past before, but there's a possibility if we can get enough quality players that we may actually have too many players heading into the season, and we may have to trim down the roster when it comes to that time. Um, we'd rather have that situation as far as the owner, and I believe the fans. Um, as well would rather have that, than what we had last year where we were kind of struggling a little bit to fill up the roster. So definitely have a much more talented pool of players this year, I think, as far as the pool to choose from, because that pool has expanded. So that is the two big new signees for this week. Again, both returning players, but in conjunction with that, that leads us to our next tryout. Our next tryout is a little bit less than a month away. It's one day out, but 7/20, so July 20th, we will be having a tryout in Fishers. The new hometown for the Hoosier State Instigators will be Fishers, Indiana. Again, we will be having a tryout for the Instigators. So that is going to be once we wrap up all of the IBL Gold Cup play. These guys who show up to this tryout will have an opportunity to become the newest Hoosier State Instigator, and hopefully, they want to join us for that ABA season. Um, but we've already got about half of that roster full. So definitely going to have to be an impressive tryout, to get that roster spot. And again, we may be in this situation where we may have to cut some players going into the season. Um, but if anybody is interested in trying out, definitely come out to that tryout. $60 for the tryout fee. And just a reminder, you have to be 18 or older to participate. And this is professional basketball. So I believe that would also make you ineligible as far as like NCAA rules go if someone were playing in college. Not really sure how many people that would apply to, but I throw that out there just in case. But if you know anybody that would be interested in trying out for the Instigators, also share this news. They've got a whole month to prepare. So even if they don't think they're in the best of shape right now, you still got a whole month to prepare and try to get yourself back into the shape for the tryout. Again, that's gonna be a little bit of a different tryout as well. Being a night tryout at 7 p.m. So that is the next tryout for the Hoosier State Instigators. Still looking, I think, at possibly throwing in a third tryout. It's just going to depend on how many players we have at this point, and if we want to continue to expand that player pool. So that is the next tryout, about a month away, and first one in our new hometown of Fishers. So we're looking forward to that. And again, if you're local to the area, if you're local to the Indianapolis region, that's closer to you. And if not, that makes it so if you have to travel, it's pretty close to the Indianapolis region. But that was one of the other big things we announced this past week. The other thing was we put out a little graphic there for a kids camp. We also just announced our first kids camp of the summer. That is going to be again at the Crossroads Community Church that we've played at many times and we'll be playing at tomorrow in Bedford, Indiana. And this is directly the week after. So on the 20th, we will be having the trial, and then the 27th, the following week, we'll have the kids camp, and that's open from anyone 6 to 14 in age, and there is a $40 fee with that. That covers a free commemorative shirt as well. So you pay that registration, you get to ball with some of your favorite Hoosier State Instigators, and you also get a pretty cool commemorative T-shirt, and it will be a unique T-shirt. I will throw a little teaser there. It's going to be a unique T-shirt for the kids camp. It's not going to be a T-shirt that is on the store currently, but we're working on doing it so that it's actually a commemorative kids camp exclusive T-shirt. So definitely a pretty cool opportunity there for some young Instigators fans to have exclusive merchandise. Um, but there's that opportunity there. So July, we will have a pretty busy schedule ahead as well. We already know this June where we've been playing the IBL Gold Cup games. We'll continue to be playing those games. We'll wrap up throughout June with that, and then when July hits, we have the Gold Cup or the Super Cup uh, playing that championship. Um, and then we have our tryout, and then we have a kids camp. So lots to look forward for this off season. Still, as much as an off season, we're still doing plenty of things with the instigators. So still lots to look forward to, and if you or anybody you know has any kids in that age range that are interested in hanging out with some pretty cool professional athletes and learning some basketball skills, definitely send them this this information. We also have on our website, I think we've got, let's see, I don't see it. But the website, so if you go to www.apexofsports.com, you can check out that, and we should have some more information in regards to that kids camp on there as well. And it's also posted on our socials, um, or it will be posted on the show socials. I'm not quite sure if we have that posted up yet, but I think it was over on the IBL pages. So if you follow the IBL, I think they already put this up. Again, that is their home venue at Crossroads Community Church. But yeah, so lots to look forward with the Instigators, um, and lots going on this off season. Um, but I think for this portion of the podcast, I think that'll be pretty much all the Instigators news that we have. Um, so two great games this past weekend, record-breaking victory, 88-point margin of victory, pretty impressive. I mean, very impressive, honestly. And then we've got, two good matchups this week, tomorrow, and two new signees, which are re signed for this season in the Instigators, another tryout, a kids camp coming up. So definitely a little bit of a jam packed week here for Instigators news. The other thing, let's jump to that. I have a couple of things more so on my personal side that we'll jump to for the last segment here in this week's episode of the podcast. So I know we've pushed this before, but one of our partners that we've had last season, and hopefully we'll continue to have this year, is Fan Controlled Sports. We had votes on Fan Controlled Sports in the past for the Instigators throughout the first ABA season. So if you get a chance, download the app if you haven't already, and get your votes in for JJ Yealy. JJ Yealy is, I've mentioned this before, my favorite athlete. I had the opportunity to have my face on his car, so I would very much appreciate any and all votes for JJ Yealy in the fan controlled app. And you can get that app at FCSE xyz. So fcse.xyz for fan control sports and entertainment. That's what the FCSE stands for. You go on there and it'll get you a direct link to download that app. But again, we look forward to hopefully partnering with them once we hit the ABA season and having some more instigators votes on the app. So this one, again, a little bit more personal for me. Yealy being my favorite athlete. I've had my face on the car. I've met him as well in person, and definitely a guy I would love if we could help get a chance to run at Pocono. And that is my home track. So if he wins that vote in the race for Pocono, I think it's up for a few more days over on the fan controlled app. Then it gives me a reason to go back home. So anybody that wants me to go back home, uh, make sure we get Yuli into that car, and I'll be back home for that race. So there's an extra incentive there for that. Um, but yeah, so that's what I'm pushing for. But again, hopefully we get partnered with them for this season to have some more votes for the instigators on there. And if you download the app, make sure you pick JJ Yealy on that fan vote. He's currently lagging behind, so we're really trying to push for that to get a little bit closer for Yealy, especially over the weekend. The other thing, this is crazy to me because obviously I look at this picture here, and it's 2017, 7 years ago. That's crazy to me. Can't believe it's that long ago. 2017 was my first year in college. It was also the first year in college. Let me change that graphic here at the top because it's blocking it just a tiny bit. And he definitely deserves all the props here. So there we go. Um, he definitely deserves all the props here. First year in college for both of these guys here in the picture. Uh, Believe it or not, that's what I used to look like with short hair, or shorter hair, I should say. And O'Shea Brissett is right behind me. This was his freshman year in college as well. So both of us, came to Cuse in 2017, and 7 years later, we've got one. I'm not sure if he even knows this, but one owns a basketball team and one is an NBA Finals champion. So congratulations to O'Shea Brissett. Definitely well earned on that. He fought his way throughout the NBA. He left Syracuse after a couple of years. He's from Mississauga, Ontario. I do know that. He was one of my favorite players at Syracuse in my time. Him and Howard Washington being the two guys that came in, the same year, freshman year as me, 2017, um, him and Howie. And those were always my two favorite guys to watch to play. He had a nice run in the tournament the one year that he was in it. But he made some nice plays. Great power forward for Syracuse when he was there, and neither one of us really look like that anymore. So that's kind of crazy to see, and look back at it and know that 7 years ago this happened. But great dude. I mean, we rode the bus sometimes together, but great person. Every interaction that I've had with him. So definitely well deserving person to be an NBA champion. And like I mentioned, he really fought his way to make it in the NBA. He left Syracuse, got was not drafted, and I mentioned he's from Ontario. He wound up having a tryout with the Raptors. He signed with the Raptors, and I believe they sent him to the G League. So he was on the G League team for a little bit. They called him up on like 10-day contracts every couple of times, and he had the opportunity there, and then and then here's the Indiana tie. He played for the Pacers. Then he went from the Raptors to the Pacers. Again, he was signed with a G League team and had a couple of 10-day opportunities. And then the Pacers, he impressed with the Pacers to the point where he got signed to an actual contract, and he was a member of the Pacers for the past few seasons as a reserve player, and he had a pretty solid role with the Pacers. Maybe about 8 to 10 minutes a game, which is a pretty solid role for somebody that went undrafted and is establishing themselves in the NBA. And then this past season, this was his first season signing with the Celtics. Again, he was a reserve role, but he had a little bit less playing time than he did on the Pacers. Um, but he got himself a nice contract with the Celtics, um, and obviously it worked out in his favor. Being an NBA champion, as far as the Syracuse side, I think that's the first time in like some crazy number of years, 40 something years, that we've had a champion from Syracuse. And even though he only checked in for a couple of games, he also, I believe, set the record for most points by by a Syracuse player in the NBA Finals in a very long time, with I think 8 points in one of those games. So huge shout out to him. But impressive, and pretty crazy to think that 7 years ago that was where I was at and where he was at, and that's pretty impressive. And I'm not a Celtics fan. I'll be honest on that. I'm a Heat fan. Obviously, I've mentioned Jaime Jaquez. That's kind of the guy that I like to root for. But O'Shea, I have that connection with him. So obviously, that's a dude that I want to see succeed in the NBA. But congratulations to him on his becoming an NBA champion. He does also push that for him. Is he does have like a YouTube channel. It's Brissy. And he does kind of like some vlogs and gives a little bit of an inside access to an NBA player's life. So pretty cool thing to check out if you're into that type of stuff. Obviously, if you're into basketball, it gives you a little bit of an insider access there to the NBA player lifestyle. But just wanted to throw that out there because that's kind of a cool connection I have with an NBA Finals champ there. Um, but as far as this week's episode, let's jump back to the games for tomorrow. So our first game for tomorrow against the Rim Ticklers. That'll be a fun game to watch. Again, if you're able to make it in person, go out and check it out in person. If not, Monday night at 9, we're going to be showing that game. And our second game of our doubleheader. Again, every weekend or every Saturday is a doubleheader game throughout June. Second game of that doubleheader is scheduled to be against Orleans. So Rim Ticklers and Orleans for the Hoosier State Instigators this weekend, tomorrow at the Crossroads Community Church in Bedford, Indiana. Again, free admission as always for all IBL Gold Cup games, and broadcast Monday night at 9, amateur night if you're not able to make it out there in person. But I think that is all for tonight's episode. Pretty full episode, lots of news for the Instigators. But that does it for tonight's episode. Thank you again, as always, for joining me on Instigate Success, Building an ABA Franchise, the official podcast of the Apex Athletic Collective and the Hoosier State Instigators. Until next time, as always, be great and instigate.